Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is the Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you the juicy information and tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding and appreciation of the Ukraine war. Where should we start? Let's start with Ramzan Kadyrov. So Kadyrov is the Chechen warlord who is helping the Russian forces by providing Chechen fighters and a lot of kind of moral support and political support for the Russians. He is a pretty controversial figure. He's just a typical warlord. Here, Kadyrov said that he has the right to run for president of Russia, but will never do it, so he says. He also stated that, quote, "We are fighting in Ukraine against fascism, Satanism, and Nazism. Anyone who doesn't want to live under the LGBT flag should stand up and help us deal with it." And this is just classic culture wars narrative to play on the fears of, in this case, super conservatives who must think that this is kind of a rational position, as if the entirety of Ukraine is just running around with a rainbow flag saying, yeah, we are fighting, our entire nation is LGBT and our national flag is a rainbow flag, and, you know, sexual equality is the entirety of our fight. Is all that we're about. Oh, and by the way, a bit of Satanism and Nazism as well thrown in, and fascism, because those things all go together. LGBT rights, Nazism, Satanism, and fascism. All of those together, throw them in. They're all completely coherent and cohesive. Just absolute nonsense. Anyway, the guy's just a complete wingnut. But there are loads of rumors going around about him at the moment. Allegedly, Kadyrov shot one of his wives in the leg after she accused him of becoming an LGBT drug addict because of his inability to perform. This is most likely just stupid rumors, but I don't mind spreading them when it comes down to Kadyrov. And there are some, you know, Telegram. The Telegram rumor mill is working overtime. But interestingly, he has produced a whole like massive rant on all sorts of stuff. And here he goes on a rant promising to keep destroying and burning Ukrainians alive. Right, just right. This comes back to the whole, if you're pro-Russian, really, do you have any kind of moral character? Do you have any moral decency? Do you understand how to do moral evaluation here? So if one of your biggest cheerleaders, so you're pro-Russian, you think Russia are doing the right thing, and here are one of our allies who are throwing in troops to do this, and here's the head of those allies saying, we promise to keep destroying and burning Ukrainians alive, right? And then you sit down and go, right, I'm a decent moral human being. I believe Russia is right because I've made a moral evaluation that they are right. Yet here is a guy that is saying we are going to keep burning Ukrainians alive. Like, how does that sit with my moral evaluation? If I agree with that, I'm a moral monster. Like, I don't get pro-Russians. I openly and overtly say I am pro-Ukrainian. Hopefully it doesn't get in the way of me evaluating sources, because I don't want to give you information that's incorrect, predominantly because I want to be correct myself. And also, if I believe something just because I want to believe it, it's called the wishful thinking fallacy. So some pro-Ukrainian rumor comes out and I'm like, this is what's happened, and I tell you guys this is what's happened. 2 days later, the actual truth will come out, because the truth always comes out in this sort of context. It's like, if I'm going to lie, if I'm going to spread disinformation or misinformation, depends whether it's purposeful or not, that, I don't know, the Ukrainians have won in this position. Then a couple of days later, like, oh, it turns out they haven't won and that was a load of rubbish, then you guys aren't going to come to my channel, because it's like, yeah, he just spreads a load of nonsense and disinformation and misinformation. And so, I want to be correct myself. I don't want to live my life on a foundation of inaccuracy. But also, it's in my best interest as a YouTube channel not to spread complete nonsense, right? So I'm pro-Ukrainian morally and politically speaking, but I will not just sing about you Ukrainian victories that haven't happened. I'm not going to be so biased that it's going to blind me to the truth. And so hopefully I'm still doing an okay job at navigating the different sources and giving you something like an accurate picture of what's going on. But for pro-Russians in the threads, like, you're not just pro-Russian in terms of your sources, but in your moral evaluation, and uh, that is a huge problem. Like, you need to establish, if you're going to come onto my threads and say "Ah, blah, blah, blah," and Russia this and Russia that. Okay, you need to establish to me precisely why your position is morally correct, precisely why you support Russia to the extent that they are having torture chambers up and down the country in Ukraine, where they're shooting civilians willy nilly. And I'm not talking about like, oh, look at what's happened in the Donbass over the last 8 years, which is like both sides. You've got little green men coming in from Russia. You've got Russia stoking this whole environment, and using fifth generation warfare and all sorts of stuff to basically foment a war since 2014 and before. And so to go, oh, this is all about the Ukrainians in the Donbass, it's all the Ukrainians' fault, is A, it's just completely wrong. But B, look at what's going on now. Like, do your moral evaluation now, and then look at these torture chambers. Look at the deaths of all these civilians. Look at the 50,000 cases of war crimes that are being presented internationally, and go, and then look at that in comparison to what you say the worst that the Ukrainians have done, and then tell me that Russia's still in the right with an outright invasion. Like, if you disagree with another country, like, politically speaking, you don't just invade it. And I know this has happened in the past, and you can talk about Iraq, but the question is, well, was I supportive of Iraq? Not really, right? It was a bit of a problem going on there, and so yeah, that was bad. But there are all sorts of bad things that have happened in the past, but they've been and gone, right? And it's not about whataboutery. It's about here and now. Are Russia morally in the right? And the answer for me is very clearly no. And if your best mates in this are going, yeah, we want to burn Ukrainians alive, and I'm going to promise to keep on doing that, then you're on the wrong side. You're just on the wrong side. I don't think you can justify being pro-Russian in this kind of context. And when you got wingnuts like this just spreading all this absolute garbage, then you can jog on. But yeah, I'm ranting clearly. Let's just have a little look at what Kadyrov says. I love my motherland, my country, my people, traditions, and I do not understand those who love the motherland only in words. Honestly, I don't understand. I don't understand those who don't see the obvious. They want to break our motherland into pieces, humiliate, trample it in the dirt, and in the end, defile our faith and culture so that we don't have any identity and not a single family value. Okay, when has Ukraine said they're going to do this to Chechnya? What is your evidence for this? That is nonsense. And if you're talking about your faith, are you claiming, well, maybe you aren't claiming Islam is a religion of peace, because clearly not if you're kind of doing this. And how about what Russia did to Chechnya? It's just such double standards. It's complete nonsense. I use the word Satanism for a reason. Indeed, there in the West, Satanism is openly acting against Russia. Evidence of what you're talking about. Satanic democracy is when the rights of atheists are protected. Like, I'm an atheist, right? But it's the rights of all religions and no religion, right? That's not Satanism. It's not satanic. Like, I'm a humanist. I would guarantee I've got better moral character and moral philosophy than you do by a country mile, right? So don't talk to me about Satanism. Don't say I'm not a Satanist, and it's not satanic democracy where the rights of a pluralistic society are defended. Absolute nonsense. But believers are offended, he continues. Or when traditional couples are deprived of children and transferred to same sex families. That's not what happens unless the traditional couple is beating up that child and maybe abusing them, and then it's taken away, because that's what a proper welfare system would do to look after that child. It's just absolute nonsense. intentionally same sex, not by chance. That doesn't happen. It's a culture wars narrative, you absolute imbecile. And in Europe, they swallowed it. They consider it modern, civilized. The more liberated the below the belt topic is, the better for them. And I see degradation and Satanism in this. And I'd rather fight its embryo there than let this abomination envelop our motherland here. You're just talking nonsense. Today, the state and the president need us. Therefore, first of all, I appeal to the Caucasians. Remember the rally in Grozny against the cartoons of our beloved Prophet Muhammad? You all went to this million people rally. You expressed dissatisfaction like all Muslims. The same forces that insulted the best of people, Muhammad, are now fighting against us in Ukraine, or rather, they are already fighting in the land of our Russia. What about when Russia invaded Chechnya? What about the Russian Orthodox Church and their position on, say, radical Islam? Gee whiz. Oh, the protesters in Grozny threatened to go to Europe and deal with the offenders. Where are those heroes? A self-respecting Muslim will not look for excuses. Voila, this is jihad, and our Chechen commanders decided not to defend themselves but only to attack. Destroy these shaitans, demons, wherever they are, and no matter how well they hide. So expect good news, they will. And love your country, love not only in words. That's Ramzan Kadyrov for you. If he is an ally of yours, you are on the wrong side. And I will be that simplistic. Right. Let's go to France, delivering M270, N270A1 LRU MLRS in the service of the armed forces of Ukraine. So this is kind of like... That's your HIMARS sort of thing. It's on tracks. So the HIMARS are wheeled. It has more rockets to shoot. But there you go. That is the M270A1 that France has given. France generally keeps quite quiet about what they've given. And so they get a bit of a bad rap quite often for not giving enough or doing enough. But often they have done things that we just aren't aware of. So this is the M27 N270 A1LRU, and this is a European variant involving Germany, France, and Italy. The launchers are equipped with the European Fire Control System designed by Airbus Defence and Space. The EFCS disables the firing of submunitions carrying rockets to ensure full compliance with the Convention on Cluster Munitions. So a bit of morality involved in that rocket launch system. Okay, let's move on to Ben Hodges, who's great to follow. Although he's using Chuck Farrer, who's not that accurate sometimes. Anyway, there you go. Why do we allow Russia to fire from Sanctuary? By not providing ATACMS, F-16s, and other long-range strike capabilities to Ukraine, we have in effect granted Sanctuary to Russia, which is able to kill innocent civilians in Ukraine without fear of consequences. Undefendable policy. And I would broadly agree there. He's playing on this idea that if we don't give the good enough weapons to the Ukrainians, particularly ranged weapons, then we are just allowing Russia to have Sanctuary to fire at the Ukrainians at will with their long-distance ranged weapons. And that is just indefensible. And he's having a rant, and I guess rightly so. Tendar says here, huge lines, so this is moving on to another completely different subject, huge lines of cars on the Kerch Bridge in Russian-occupied Crimea. I haven't seen much talk about this anywhere else, so, be skeptical of the claim. Russians are fleeing in droves from the peninsula. It's obvious they don't believe the propaganda of Moscow. But it'd be interesting to see if those who have subsequently moved from Russia to Crimea in the years from 2014 onwards, in a kind of the Russian attempt to generationally affect the populations of where they occupy, so they become much more pro-Russian, are thinking, yeah, I want to move back to Russia now. It's probably not a good time to be a kind of Russian expat, if you like, in Crimea. Anyway, That's that. Euromade Press, Euromade Press did an interesting analysis of the sanctions. So at least 46 countries or territories imposed a total of just under 10,000 sanctions on Russia over the war, making it the most sanctioned country ahead of Iran, Syria, and North Korea. 8,613 sanctions placed on individuals, 1,658 against entities, 92 against vessels, and 14 on aircraft. But it's this infographic that I find really interesting, because when you look at this, yes, okay, the Western world and the economic powerhouses are somewhat involved in these sanctions. But then you look at Mexico, almost the entirety of South America, the entirety of Africa, and almost all of Asia. I don't think the mapping's done correctly here, because they've included Japan but not coloured it, and there's South Korea there. But so Japan should be yellow as well. Look at how many countries are not sanctioning Russia. So when you talk about the military industrial complex still able to operate and still able to manufacture weapons and equipment for the Russian army and air force, how does that still happen? They're sanctioned. Well, yeah, they're sanctioned, but look at the amount of places that you can get loopholes. Look at all this border where you can fly and drive and use railway to take goods from any number of countries around the world to create munitions and equipment. So yes, brilliant sanctions, great sanctions, well done for all these countries. But really, sanctions are only as good as the kind of the consensus that you have. And in this case, most of the rest of the world are not abiding by sanctions, or not buying into the sanctions against Russia, and that is a big problem. As I talked to you earlier about the Bradley being talked about, the Bradley infantry fighting vehicle possibly being given over to Ukraine, which could replace the BMP-1. It's better across a whole bunch of metrics, and arguably better than giving them Abrams tanks. So some say. Mark Hartland's one of them. He says he's biased. It was my vehicle during Desert Storm, but would agree for a variety of reasons. Chain gun, tows, which is a type of missile system you can put on top, speed, easier maintenance, smaller crew, better mileage, and available vehicles. He's replying to Rob Lee, who said that the Bradleys over the BMP-1 is a greater asset to the Ukrainians than giving them a small amount of Abrams tanks. Anyway, I talked about that earlier. I'm just going to want to add a few bits. It's always interesting looking at comments below people like Mark Hartland, because when you follow people who are in his armed services, or were in the armed services, they have a lot of followers who were, and they're just off the cuff comments are quite interesting, because it gives you a sense of what people with knowledge who have fought and served in these contexts gives you an insight into their thinking and an access to their knowledge. There you go. So here, people talking about how they were on crews of these and saying how good they are. So Mark Hartland himself says so. Here, some guy says, if memory serves, didn't they take out some 72s in the Gulf War, T-72 tanks? And Mark Hartland said, yeah, his own crew had 2 T-72 kills. In other words, these are effective vehicles for fighting against tanks. So you don't necessarily have to give them Abrams to have tank-on-tank effectiveness. These infantry fighting vehicles, if used well, can do a really good job. And if the Bradleys are decent pieces of kit, then actually they will serve as really useful assets for the Ukrainians. Have to agree they're maneuverable under fire, lower cost, and more efficient than the M1A1. So these are other such vehicles that have, I think, already been given to Ukraine. Also, it looks like they could fit their tactics well. Great smash, grab, and scoop weapon. So really quick, able to get in, do stuff, and get out. This was a success of the counteroffensive in Kharkiv. They were able to move really quickly and use that kind of shoot and scoot tactic. Yeah, there. Ukraine already has experience operating the M270 on the same chassis, even if in small numbers. So that also bodes well for having some mechanics with experience on hand. The key thing will be the numbers. If the US can spare at least a few hundred, it will be a game changer. Well, there's argument that they could actually spare maybe 1,000. There are a lot of these. in storage, so on and so forth. Anyway, really interesting comments thread, and lots of people getting involved and talking about how useful they are and how many of them are around and all that kind of stuff. And then I talked about earlier that in my update video, in my frontline update video, that Rebar sharing this picture saying that a dozen of these 4x4 trucks are seen with swivel mechanism for machine guns mounted on the back, shows that Russia are in trouble if they don't have the military vehicles to send to Ukraine, and they're adapting some of these civilian vehicles to turn them into technicals. Then they are in trouble resource-wise, and this kind of plays into the idea that perhaps they're culminating in certain places because they don't have the capability and the capacity at the moment. We'll see when they get the mobilized troops in the spring that are being trained. Possibly throw in a couple of 100,000 troops and things will be different, but at the moment it looks rather like they are culminating. And the last thing I am going to talk about is a JDAM, so Joint Direct Attack Munitions. What are they and what could they do for Ukraine? So there's been lots of articles. This one's referring to a Washington Post article. There's a very good New York Post article as well on them. So what are they? Broadly speaking, the JDAM kit can be mated with £2,000 Mark 84, £1,000 Mark 83, and £500 Mark 82 dumb bombs. So these are bombs that just dropped, and with the speed of an aircraft, they have the trajectory, using physics. So it's not going to just drop directly down from where the aircraft is. As the aircraft is moving, that will give it some forward momentum, and so they will have some kind of trajectory that is able to be calculated, so they hit the target. But they're still dumb munitions, and they won't have any great range. Well, this is hopes or seeks to change that reality. So interestingly, Washington Post also brings up the possibility of some kind of ground launch weapon, although there's no known ground launch JDAM derivative. Ukraine has, however, recently been connected with the possible transfer of the ground launch small diameter bomb, or GLSDB, a precision strike weapon based on the air-dropped small diameter bomb. So again, it's a kind of adaptation of existing munitions. But it will be interesting if the JDAM kit can be fired from the ground, or whether that's just not quite correct reporting. In its basic form, the JDAM guidance package uses an inertial navigation system, INS, and a GPS receiver, which together ensure that the bomb can hit its chosen target with a high degree of accuracy within tens of feet in any weather. It's a fire and forget in that the launch aircraft can turn away and run after release. Should the GPS signal be jammed or otherwise unavailable, the accuracy is reduced, but it is still within the weapon's effective blast area in most cases. Although unpowered, the JDAM provides a degree of standoff range, being able to hit targets at up to 15 miles away with launch from a typical fast jet speed and altitude. So what these are, these are not, so the package that you put on these bombs, these dumb bombs, isn't like a rocket system that will fire it, give it greater range because, it's actually got some kind of rocket propulsion. But it puts fins and some kind of guidance system so that with the speed of the aircraft and the altitude, you can add, with fins that can be guided, you can add a certain amount of range to that dumb munition and accuracy. So, and in fact, there are kits that can be used as well. I don't know whether Ukraine are going to get them, that can also be used to hit moving targets. To at least to some degree. So they aren't super good on range. Like 15 miles, it's better than not 15 miles, right? But it's not ATACMS or anything like that. However, so these would be used close to the front line, where you want to hit maybe trench areas, bunkers, things that need a decent bit of explosive munition, ordnance, to take out. So there is an issue with integrating these with the Ukrainian aircraft. So that will take a bit of challenging work to do. But they've done this already with their HARM missiles and other ones. So that's just a challenge that will be overcome. It seems likely that Ukraine would employ the JDAM in a pre-programmed mode with target coordinates inputted on the ground before flight. This would remove the flexibility to retarget in flight, but would still offer valuable precision with some standoff range against known targets. And then further on down here, I mean, it's a great article, lots of information in it. It's from thedrive.com. Even the £500 version would provide a greater punch than the M31 rockets fired by HIMARS in some regards. The kind of standoff aerial attack possible with JDAM would be especially useful for hitting Russian key targets near the front lines. Obviously, they're not going to be able to get the range beyond that, even ones that are large and heavily fortified. The other big advantage that JDAM offers is the sheer number of these weapons available from the United States and many of its allies. In that sense, it shares many of the benefits of supply with the AIM-120 AMRAAMs. So these are useful bits of kit. Obviously, you're going to have to be flying aircraft close to the front line. So there is, I would imagine, some challenge to using these. Other than the fact that they have limited range, you are putting your aircraft in harm's way potentially. But you can imagine this kind of ordnance being used in Bakhmut on some of those forces, some of those Russian installations and entrenchments and whatever behind Bakhmut, and you could cause some real problems, especially if you have a big bunch of these. They are cheaper, so I think they work out about $21,000 plus, say, a 4,000. Depends which bomb you use them with. With a $4,000 bomb, that's about $25,000, which is, you can put that against, say, so here it compares with the average of $70,000 for a US Air Force AGM 114 Hellfire. So that's cheaper than that. But then compared to a joint air-to-surface standoff missile, AGM 158, that's 1.2 million. So massively cheaper than that, and maybe 3 times cheaper than a similar sort of missile. So there you go. They are cheap and cheerful, but although it would be challenging to get the aircraft fitted to them, and will have, I think, would just be useful. It's just another string to the Ukrainians' bow, even if they don't have the range that really we like out of something like ATACMS. So there you go. That's an introduction to JDAM. I've probably butchered my explanation, but call me out in the comments if I have. Hopefully this whole video has been useful to you. Just to remind you, I'm going live next week with Dr. Darren Girdes, who's a pro-Ukrainian YouTuber and a professor, but he's also a conservative Christian, politically conservative Christian, and I am a liberal atheist, and we're going to have a chat about why we agree. How do we get to this position where we disagree on virtually everything in the world, but we agree on Ukraine? What parts do we agree on? How do our worldviews inform that conclusion? So on and so forth. Should be a really interesting chat. That's, I think, next Wednesday evening UK time, afternoon American time. And if you live somewhere else in the world, it'll be some other time. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to this ramble. I hope it's been in some way informative. Please like, subscribe, share. Thanks for all your support. Take care, and I will speak to you tomorrow.